You're listening to Forecast, the marketing podcast for professional services leaders. If you're looking to generate more leads, win more deals, and take your firm to the next level, this show is your shortcut. Hey there, folks. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Ahmed Munawar. I've got Jason Foster of Cynozure on the show today for another one of those hot seat interviews. Jason's a brilliant guy, started up a firm in the big data space, and is really starting to get a lot of traction in a number of different markets. But he's got a very typical kind of challenge here in that they're really, really smart. They have strong capabilities at the firm, and they're not really sure which way to go next because there's so many opportunities. And they operate in a space where if you've got a lot of data, then they can help you. But a lot of different companies have a lot of data, a lot of industries, a lot of verticals, so it's not entirely clear where they should focus. So we get into the nitty-gritty details of where Cynozure should focus their efforts, how they should divide up the market, who they should target first, and how they can build a marketing funnel that'll turn strangers into really qualified leads for their services. Show notes for this episode are at forecast.fm/Cynozure. That's forecast.fm/CYNOZURE. Before I let you go, if you haven't yet joined us inside our free course on the 5 Ps of lead generation for professional services firms, you're going to want to check that out. Inside the course, I will show you a step-by-step framework that you can use to generate a flood of new business for your firm. It's 100% free of charge, and you can get immediate access at 5leadgen.com. You can spell out 5 or use the number. Either one works. That's 5leadgen.com. Here's Jason. Jason, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Great to be part of the show. Thanks.
Another brave soul jumping on the hot seat. It's always good to see.
Well, it's interesting to be part of this and hopefully get some good insight from you.
I hope so. So why don't you kick this off for us, Jason, by telling us a little bit about yourself and about your business?
Yeah, sure. No problem. So I'm Jason and I run a business called Cynozure here in the UK. We're a data and analytics strategy consultancy. Professional services business, and our aim is to help organizations figure out how they identify where value exists within their data, and we help them go on the journey from identifying where they can get that value from and how they go about doing it and ultimately executing against that.
Can you describe the clients that you typically work with?
We work across lots of different sectors. Any business with a customer, so sort of B2C organizations, typically sit on a whole load of data, and typically therefore can get lots of value from that data. So that's retailers, that's hospitality businesses, that's entertainment and media businesses. But also there's sort of B2B organizations where, moving products around in between, sort of distribution or supply chain, the sort of back end part of the sort of the retail supply chain, I guess. The proposition that we have works across multiple sectors, and personally we have, within the business, we have experience across banking and insurance and telcos and all sorts of private sector, but also public sector businesses, sort of local and central government as well.
And what's the typical size of a company to be able to leverage, insights from their data? How big do they have to be?
Well, what we're finding, interestingly, is that organizations of all sizes have the ability and capacity to be able to do some really good stuff in this place. And actually, a lot of we do some work with startups, and they actually have using data in their DNA, and therefore, sort of from day one of constructing their business, they're able to. They're looking at ways to be able to use data, metrics, insight, understand consumer behavior in a way that wasn't possible a number of years back. And they build their company from the ground up from that perspective, all the way to sort of large corporate enterprises who are looking at ways to grab hold of all this data that they've been collecting, either very purposefully or just through the nature of sort of delivering their business, and looking at ways to construct and bring that data together to really sort of put it at the heart of their business to drive their decision making. So it does span across all organizations. We're trying to sort of find organizations that have a real desire and passion to do something in this space, and are just looking for the way to sort of get started, correct the direction that they're going in, or focus on the right outcomes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you next. Is there like a certain type of organization or a profile, whether that's some combination of demographics or psychographics, that is, what we would call an ideal client, in the sense that it's the easiest sell. They're just as motivated as you are, but on the buyer side, and you're able to extract the most value for them? What does that organization look like?
I guess it tends to be an organization, as I say, that has the desire and understands that there's something they can do here, but they don't necessarily know the steps they need to take in order to do it. So it's sort of quite a pragmatic look and feel, if you like. A number of years back, people weren't necessarily even aware that there was such power in their data. And a lot of the time it was about talking about, like, convincing organizations that there was that value, and then helping them to sort of go through the journey. Now there's a whole load of organizations that are like, we know there's something here, we just don't really get where to start, who to recruit, what organizational structure I need, what technology I should look at, what use cases I should go after. So that sort of organization or person in role who's responsible for going on that journey is sort of typically who we go after. So it's not necessarily one sort of horizontal or vertical that we're looking for, but it's really that organization that has a need and a desire to do something and needs that sort of direction.
Right. So they know that there's something there. There's gems hiding in the data, and they need someone's help to come in and discover what those gems are. Who is that person in the organization that's making that decision?
It's a bit of a mix. There's a lot of the time this comes from a marketing part of the organization, CMO or head of customer or customer services, something like that. And typically that's in sort of your B2C type organizations where understanding consumer behavior is the most important thing, and therefore that tends to sit in a marketing type function. But often it can be through the finance department, who often own sort of metrics and data and reporting within a business. Sometimes they sort of bubble up to be the sort of the driver for getting a handle on data. More recently, digital sort of play that role in bringing data to the heart of the organization. So again, it can be a bit of a mix, and there's a sort of a relatively new role that is emerging out of this space called the Chief Data Officer, and often that's a good sort of indicator that an organization has the desire to do something, that they're putting a sort of senior person in post to sort of lead the journey, and we can support chief data officers in constructing a strategy and going on the journey. Or if an organization doesn't have one, we can play that role for them.
Which works out better for you, if they have a chief data officer or not?
Really, really good question. Interestingly, it's where they don't, and that's because chief data officers have got to that position because they know what they're doing. They know what they need to do. They know how to play the politics of an organization. They know how to create the network internally. They know the kind of skills they need. So they tend to be able to accelerate the journey themselves without that sort of counsel, I guess. Whereas organizations that don't have that, as I say, have the desire, but don't necessarily have the knowledge about how to execute on that desire.
Yeah, it'd be a completely different positioning strategy, right? So without a CDO, you're the CDO for hire, essentially, your firm. With a CDO, exactly. You'd have to position yourself as some kind of a support external arm to the CDO, but you wouldn't be doing the work that a CDO would typically do, because then that would be redundant. Yeah,
absolutely. And yeah, so often if an organization has that lead, it's either a critical friend to that person to have some counsel in the sorts of things that they're looking to or thinking about doing to bounce ideas off, or it's simply to help accelerate the journey. They need more strategists, they need more analysts, they need more data expertise, and it's about accelerating the journey, or they don't have the bandwidth, don't have the time to recruit the team. So yeah, it's slightly different positioning where there's a mature data organization already in place versus a organization that doesn't have that data capability.
Got it. And what do your engagements typically look like?
We lead with a strategy message. So often we come into an organization to help either shape a data and analytics strategy from scratch, or help to review a strategy that's been written or that has been being implemented for a while, and help to correct it or course correct it, some of our clients call it. So we tend to come in to help understand and shape a strategic direction for how data can be used and what things need to be put in place. And what we're finding is through that discussion and that engagement that is at a sort of senior level, that then you need to execute on that strategy. You need to go and design something or build something. So often we then tend to start to look at how else can we support that organization to meet the strategy that's been set.
Now, between the strategy and the execution, which of those engagements would you say is kind of your bread and butter?
They both are. The strategy work, I guess, is more high value and management consulting type work. So it's where we can really build sort of trust and relationship with our clients and help lead a sort of a higher level thing for a company. The sort of the execution, which tends to be technical sort of solution build, shall I say, technical delivery work. There are a whole load of organizations on the market that you could go and choose depending on the technology you're using or the vertical that you're in or something like that. But in the strategy space, there's sort of less people who are supporting organizations, and it's the area that we've crafted a bit of a space for ourselves.
So how have you differentiated yourself on that strategy piece?
A few ways. One is that the people within our organization that do the strategic work, the strategy work, the advisory work, are ex-practitioners. So we are people who have been there and done it in industry. We've been through the kinds of challenges that we talk to our customers about them having, and we've sort of got over those challenges, and we've implemented successful data analytics strategy in industry, in large corporate businesses, and in other organizations as well. So we differentiate by being people that have been there, done it, have the scars, have the stories, and know some of the challenges that are coming down the road, and can help organization either avoid them or overcome them if they do hit them.
So forgive my ignorance, but I would imagine anybody in this business is an ex-practitioner. Is that not the case?
No, not always. What we're finding is that, particularly with some of our sort of large consulting competition, some of the sort of the more established players in this space that have been around for a lot longer, a lot of the people you get are people that have come up through the ranks of consulting. They've only done consulting. They don't have necessarily the breadth of, the depth of experience as a in-house industry employed person. So often it's the consulting handbook that you're being given rather than genuine depth of knowledge and understanding about the thing that the organization is trying to do. And we often get told during sort of early engagements before we've been brought on, that it's refreshing to hear someone that genuinely has the depth and knowledge and understanding of what they're trying to do, rather than just the thing that you can read in a blog or the thing that you can read online. And that's that there isn't as many of those around.
Yeah, right. That makes sense. And I would imagine a lot of the smaller firms are probably ex-big consulting folks who, again, have only had that consulting experience.
Potentially, yeah, exactly. And often what some of the sort of the some other consulting firms do is sort of bring in or subcontract other specialist firms. So if you have a generalist consulting firm going in and they do data, but they also do business process outsourcing, and they do finance outsourcing, and they do technology implementation and hosting. They're generalists, but they want to do data and analytics. They often bring in a subcontract company to do the work around data analytics. So if you're talking to them in that capacity, they just don't have the experience. Yes, the company has the reference, but the people that they have don't have the experience in doing it. So what we bring is both the experience in doing it as Cynozure, the company, but also previous experience at doing it for similar organizations, as I say, as a practitioner on the inside.
Have you pursued any of these subcontracting arrangements with the big firms?
No, actually. We have partnerships in place with organizations that we feel are complementary to our offering, and there's sort of enough of an overlap that it makes sense to sort of partner, but we haven't looked at any sort of subcontracting arrangements, no.
Okay, and that's a good kind of overview. I have a better sense of now what's going on and what you're doing. Could you just kind of frame up for us now, what are the challenges?
So we set the business up the start of last year, so sort of basically January 1st, 2016. That was sort of ideation phase, figuring out what slice of message in this space, in this sort of fairly crowded market, would resonate, would give us our USP, would give us an opportunity to have a conversation in companies. And so last year was about sort of putting a platform in place and to get into organizations and to help organizations on this journey. And we had a great year. This year is much more about sort of scaling that up and accelerating the journey. So some of the sort of things we're focusing on to help us do that is to put the right systems and processes in place for us to market ourselves effectively and ensure that we can scale, and that we're not always sort of chasing our tails, if you like, from as we continue to scale. We're looking to sort of identify and find the right audience to talk to and find them in the right place, and build a sort of a process for generating demand for our services through our expertise and our knowledge and the work that we've done before, that really resonates with people. So that's sort of where we're sort of focusing. And I guess the challenges we've got we are scaling rapidly. We've had amazing growth this year already, and this year's from where I wanted the organization to be and where we will be is poles apart in the positive. So one of the biggest challenges is how do we, I guess, keep up with that growth? How do we maintain that growth? How do we create a pipeline and a system behind this growth that means that this year doesn't just become a great second year that was a bit of a spike and then we have to start again in year three. I'd say that's probably like my key challenge and the thing that keeps me awake at night, is how do we keep up with ourselves, I guess. That would be the prime one, I'd say.
Okay, great. Let's peel that layer by layer. First thing I'll ask you is, what's worked so far from a marketing perspective?
Building a network of people that we know and trust and help each other out, I would say. So, and what I mean by that is partners and relationships that drive referrals and recommendations. So most of the business that we've got has been through a referral from either an individual or a business that we have a good relationship with. That's driven most of the growth so far.
And give me an example. What's a typical profile of one of these referral partners?
Most of them are people who are at a relative stage of maturity. So other organizations in this space that do something slightly different but overlaps enough that we're in and around a similar set of organizations that we all jointly want to be having discussions with. And in a nice sort of symbiotic way, we share knowledge about what's happening, and it's not always right for you as the organization to be positioning yourself in there, but actually it's the right time for one of our friends, one of our partners to be positioned in there, because that's where the organization, the end customer is. So partners who being most successful, and relationships that are being most successful are ones that are of similar stage in their maturity as a business. So companies that are of a similar size and shape, if you like, that tends to be what's worked really well. So that could be other services businesses, that could be technology businesses, that could be other consulting businesses. The type is varied.
So it's essentially you're building your tribe of complementary organizations and firms that are working with similar customers but doing slightly different things.
Exactly, yeah, and it gives us reach beyond our capacity to talk to organizations, if you like. It gives us an extended sales team, if you can call it that, that works, that sort of works both ways. So we're looking out for each other.
And how many of these relationships, whether it's informal or formal, would you say that you have right now?
Probably 5 or 6. Formal ones, I'd say. So 5 or 6 where we've got a sort of a stated partnership and we both work hard at that relationship. And then there's a whole number of other individuals and relationships that we've built up over the years that bring, that we continue to talk to each other. But I'd say sort of 5 or 6 ones that we really focus our attention and efforts on.
And are you seeing more opportunities there for more relationships, or do you think that's you're kind of tapping out?
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is one for us to talk about. I mean, one of the key things for us is how do we make sure that our partners and our friends sort of keep up to date with about what we're doing and about our proposition, about where we want to be heading and the work that we've done. That's sort of one side, and the other side is there's a lot of work that goes into those relationships, or those partnerships, I should say, to build the relationship. And my view is that the more you have, it sort of gets harder to build those really nice, close, trusted relationships that mean you sort of partner well together. So I don't really want to build. It's a bit of a difficult conundrum because I don't really want to build a partner ecosystem so big that that we can't have really quality relationships, but equally we know that it's a really good referral and route to market.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair concern. I think the way you want to look at this is in the same way that you have a customer funnel, which I want to talk about in a bit. You want to have a referral funnel as well, or a relationship funnel, if you want to call it that. So, yeah, you certainly don't want to go in, head first in every relationship and pour all kinds of time and energy into it because you don't know if it's worth it. But you want to have a funnel that will allow you to test the waters in a relationship in a really small and kind of low risk way. And then the relationships that may be worthy of pursuing at deeper levels, then they kind of follow through a certain flow and you have a process. So, for example, a really rudimentary process might be something like you initiate contact via LinkedIn and you schedule a phone call. You have that initial phone call, learn more about what they do. They learn more about what you do. And if it makes sense, you meet in person. From there, maybe you have these are examples, but maybe you have like a co-branded content exercise where you co-brand a webinar. If there is some kind of overlap and you guys can work together on something, then you co-brand a webinar or a white paper or some piece of content, and you share that with both of your respective customers. So it's kind of an easier way to begin the referral relationship. And you might want to try this with your existing referral partners as well.
Yep.
And if that goes really well, then you have a more of an in-depth conversation around, okay, well, how can we work together? But either way, you have these various stages of a relationship, and you only invest when it makes sense to pursue the next stage.
Yeah, makes sense.
Given that example, what do you think that kind of relationship funnel might look like for you?
Well, what you explained there actually isn't too dissimilar from what we have in place. I mean, it's not really a stated process like that, but that's just sort of how they've come about. And we're doing some co-branded marketing with some of our partners that we've got better, deeper relationships with. That's either a breakfast briefing for people, or a webinar, or we've done some white paper work that we've pushed out through some partner channels. So we've done some of that already, and some of those are stated partnerships, where we've got drawn up partnership agreements, and some of those are more just a relationship thing. So yeah, I mean, as a set of steps to sort of get to know organizations, that's fairly in line with how we've been doing things. I guess the challenge that I'm thinking is, how do we have the right number and mix of those partnership organizations, and how do we invest the right amount of time and energy in the ones that we think we can make work, and make sure that, you know, we continue to build and grow the relationship. And just sort of die out.
And I think your approach is good. I think less is more, right? So you only want to have a small handful of those really core organizations, because you can't be building relationships with 20 referral partners at this stage anyways, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
so I think that makes sense. But you also want to have a pipeline of potential relationships, because, you know, maybe there are some out there who are a better fit for a referral partner right now than some of the organizations that you're working with. So you don't want to limit yourself just because of what you have in front of you. You want to be actively exploring what else is out there, because there might be some better options.
True. Really good point. So what we haven't done is identify other types of organization that we should partner with, or actual names of organizations that we should partner with, and actively gone and explored those. So yeah, that's definitely something that we should look to do.
And I would think there's a few different categories of organizations that I'm sure you've looked at. But on the one hand, you have other firms who are offering a complementary service, like we talked about. You might have associations of professionals. So maybe you have marketing associations for CMOs, things like that. Or any other kind of, I'm just thinking about industry specific stuff. So you might have a retail association, or a telecom or a banking association that you could do some kind of an event with, or a webinar, or, you know, because they're not going to have the data insight, but you have the insight that can create value for their audience and their constituents rather. And so you develop a relationship that way. Have you explored some of those relationships at all?
No, I think that's the point. I don't think we've taken a step back and gone, right, where do we have gaps in the kinds of companies that we've got partnerships with, and would any of those be more effective than any of the ones that we have? We definitely haven't done that. And I mean, we have looked, having said that, we have looked at taking our message through certain verticals, certain industries, like a marketing event or a retail event, but we haven't looked at partnering with organizations that are in those spaces. Yeah,
and it might start with an event, or a speech at one of their gatherings. It might start with something simple like that.
Yeah,
and then you never know where it might go from there. But yeah, I think associations is an interesting one to look at, because they're definitely not competitors, and they tend to be quite large, and they have they have an audience of people that you want to be talking to. So that could lead to speaking engagements, that could lead to keynotes, that could lead to all kinds of interesting opportunities.
Yeah, sounds great.
Now, the second point that you mentioned is we need to get clear on who we're talking to. What did you mean by that?
So right up front, actually, you asked about who's our sort of target audience, and I gave a fairly sort of long answer about there's lots of different organizations, and I'm sort of acutely aware that that one approach is to define a target audience, at least for a certain marketing activity, even if it's not for the whole business, but marketing activity at a certain audience. So picking an audience, whether that's a vertical, banking or insurance or retail, or supply chain, or whether that's some sort of horizontal, so marketing or finance department or something, or whether it's a very specific set of roles that we want to sort of help and support. We want to look to from a content or a marketing activity or business development activity perspective to find the right audience and talk to them in the right way.
And so what's your thought process there? I mean, it sounds like you haven't really dialed it in at either of those levels yet. Is there a reason for that? Is there a challenge there?
We have been busy building relationships and winning business in where those relationships make sense to sort of go and hunt, if you like. So it's been, as I say, because a lot of our work has been referral, and we're referred business in a space that we have background in. So it sort of has self-selected, if you like, the industry based on our experience. So it's not completely random. But we haven't needed to yet. We've got some really good growth out of this route, but to sort of focus our message, that's where I mean sort of we want to target a specific audience. So it's not that we don't know who it is, or that it's just more that we haven't yet done that or needed to do that as a sort of a marketing activity.
So you mentioned a number of industries earlier on in the conversation.
Yeah.
When you say we tend to be getting business in the industries that we have experience in, so it's self-selective in that respect, which ones are the big, what are the big 2 or 3?
It's ones, as I talked about, sort of the B2C. So anyone selling something to an end consumer, I guess. So and we have a charity, we have music and entertainment business, we have a hospitality business. So it's that area. We haven't refined down on, say, just retail or something like that, but it tends to be organizations that have an end customer rather than B2B, although we do have some of those customers as well. And
is there a typical role in the organization? Is it typically marketing?
It has been, yeah. So in the B2C businesses, it tends to be marketing or someone in charge of customer, which is sort of another way of talking about marketing.
Okay. So here's where I want to go with this. I think what's really needed here is we need to map out a funnel or a demand gen process, as you called it, potato, but a process through which we're going to be able to attract more prospective customers, engage them in a conversation, and ultimately be able to close them into clients. What I'm seeing here is, it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds to me like it might be a little bit premature to really dive specifically into an industry or a vertical. I think B2C, it makes sense. I think marketing makes sense as a buyer, but then keeping it open to all the different, sub industries within B2C, like retail, music, entertainment, hospitality. I think keeping it open-ended right now seems to be the best approach. What do you think?
Yeah. No, that certainly works, because we are a horizontal play, if you like. This works, and the cross industry sharing. So we share knowledge and skills from, say, retail into a non-retail business, and those messages sort of resonate. So we quite like the ability to sort of bring new ideas and disrupt thinking in industries by bringing experience from other industries. So yeah, it makes sense for us from a strategy point of view.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a big benefit of taking this kind of positioning, is that cross-pollination of ideas. The challenge, though, is can you speak to the needs and the problems of a CMO at all of these different organizations in kind of one piece of content, one message?
Can we speak? I think with the right message, yeah, that's just, I suppose, fairly obvious. But I mean, the challenges for a CMO tend to be fairly typical in all organisations, and the opportunity equally is. I think the size of the opportunity changes depending on which company you're talking to, and the size and the scale and success they've had. But yeah, I think at a role level, there's a common set of challenges and opportunities that you can talk to the CMO about.
Yeah. No, so I think definitely from a messaging perspective, focusing in on the CMO and getting really crystal clear about their needs and their challenges and their desired outcomes makes a lot of sense. Could you just speak a little bit about what are those outcomes for the CMO? Like, if you come in, you do the work, you do your best work, what do you leave behind? What does the CMO help? What does he achieve through this engagement?
From a values outcome perspective, I guess, it's normally in the space of understanding their customers better, in order to create sort of brand engagement, create better loyalty, and that's done through better targeting of their either content or their products or their prices or their offering, and driving better sort of retention of their customer base. So it's in understanding customers, so customer insight, and then plugging that into their marketing efforts to drive brand engagement, repeat business, loyalty, and those sorts of things. And and we support them through the thinking about how they do that from a data and analytics perspective. So what we want to leave them with is a clear understanding about which of the marketing problems, if you like, can most effectively be supported with data and analytics, a clear understanding of the strategy and approach for getting there from a business perspective and a technology perspective, and a clear understanding of the people, roles, ways of working, and sort of modus operandi, if you like, on a day-to-day basis of how they need to perform as a business and continue to test, learn, and iterate the things that help them to drive the outcomes. So we help with the thinking, we help with the designing, and we help with the execution in order to meet those sort of business outcomes that I talked about.
Okay. Let's get down to brass tacks. I'm going to propose a funnel.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to go out and I'm going to give you a funnel, and it's, I want you to pay attention to the principles here, not necessarily the specific tactics, but tell me what you think. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
So 3-level funnel, right? Let's take a basic framework: attraction, retention, conversion. So attraction's the top of the funnel, retention's the middle of the funnel, conversion's the bottom of the funnel. And I'm looking at this more from a marketing perspective. So when I say conversion, I don't mean client, I mean like an active sales conversation, right? And then you'd have a biz dev process that would ensue from there. So at the attraction stage, I think for somebody like you, where you are a demonstrated, proven thought leader in the space, and you're being recognized for that, the most powerful attraction piece that I've seen work is a white paper. Okay. Some kind of white paper where you're really flexing your muscles now, right? And you don't have to call it a white paper. That's not the point, but a thought leadership piece where you're really flexing your muscles from an expertise perspective, but you're applying that in a way that solves a specific problem for a specific person. So for example, in our case of the CMO at a B2C organization, maybe you tackle the topic of understanding consumer behavior, right? How to use data and analytics to extract insights on consumer behavior and help you sell more of your product, right?
Yeah.
I think you'd have to necessarily pick like one specific thing, so consumer behavior or brand engagement and loyalty. You probably can't cover everything in one white paper, but you could sequentially over time cover all of them. So maybe, one example might be you do like a white paper every quarter, right? First you tackle consumer behavior, then you tackle brand engagement and loyalty, and then something else. And over the course of a year, 2 years, you have a whole library of white papers now tackling each of these specific business problems and objectives that the CMO has. Okay. And then you build a little funnel around each of them. So from the white paper, first of all, everyone doesn't read white papers as much as it looks interesting to them, and they may download it. Very few people actually read an entire white paper. They may skim it, scan it, see if there's anything particularly of interest or value, and then if it does look interesting, leave it on their desktop or in their inbox and say, I'll come back to it. But unfortunately, usually coming back to it never happens. So what you want to do then is middle of the funnel now, retention. So at this stage, you're on their radar. They've downloaded the white paper, right? They kind of know who you are and what you do and where your expertise is, but it ends there, right? At the retention stage, I think one of the best ways to really strengthen and deepen that relationship is through some kind of a webinar. And that can vary in terms of format and length. I mean, I'm seeing webinars right now working that are as short as 15 minutes and as long as 60 minutes. I think with executives, it's always good to keep it shorter. So the 15-minute webinar, which you wouldn't call a webinar, you can call it a 15-minute executive brief or a 15-minute CMO brief in your case, keeping it really short and sweet. And getting really clear on what you're going to get in this 15 minutes or 30 minutes is really important for the buyers that you're targeting. But in that webinar, you could do a couple of things. You could share some of the key insights from the white paper, so position it a little bit differently, but share a lot of the same ideas that are in the white paper, because a 15-minute webinar is easier for me to consume information on than a 20-page white paper. Right. And it also reinforces the value in the white paper. So you can remind people that you've got this already. If you don't have it, here's a link again. And there's details here, but I wanted to give you a high level overview of what's contained in the white paper and how you can use the ideas. You could also share a process. So this is something that I'm seeing working quite well for firms that are of your profile, deep expertise in an area that folks can't really replicate themselves internally unless they have that CDO. right? So what you could do is just share a process for a marketing leader. If you want to extract the kind of insights we talk about in the white paper from your data, here's the process. And you share that process in a way that's accessible, certainly, to the marketing leader. So you assume that they don't have a lot of background in data. And you share some of the challenges in going through the process. And then at the end, you say, look, this is a lot of work and it requires expertise. We tried to kind of distill it down for you into some practical steps. But if you need help, that's why we're here. This is what we do. Give us a call. And that's your call to action, right?
Okay.
So through that kind of, and the focus would not be on the technical details of the process because they won't care and they won't understand it anyways. The focus would be on the outcomes that can be achieved through the process. And once they're sold on the outcomes, then calling you becomes kind of a no-brainer.
Okay.
And there's other things you could do on the webinar, but I think having some kind of a presentation where they can hear from you, and it's on demand, ideally, right? So doing live webinars is great, but for this kind of thing, ideally it's evergreen and it's on demand, and whenever they're ready to jump on, there's a session playing right then and there.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. And then having some kind of a conversion offer at the bottom of the funnel, right? So this could be, initially could be as simple as let's hop on a conversation, like 15-minute phone call, 30-minute phone call, and we'll let you know if it's worth a deeper exploration on the topic of data, right? So if you're not sure if it makes sense to go through a data and analytics process like we offer, let's hop on the phone, talk about your business, tell us about what kind of data you have and what you're struggling with, and we'll let you know if it's worth a deeper conversation. If it's not, no worries, right?
Yeah.
But if it is, we'll tell you what that looks like, and then have like your clear steps to go from that stage to an engagement laid out for them so they know what it looks like. You could get fancier with the conversion offer. I think initially at this stage, it probably doesn't make sense to just keep it very open-ended because your goal is to have conversations and you want to kind of remove any obstacles to the conversation as much as possible.
Yeah.
So I have a couple more things, but just at that level, how does that sound?
Yeah, that's nicely laid out, the steps, and actually some of the stuff we've done sort of lends itself quite well. So we have, as an example, we have a white paper, that sort of first part of that attraction, and we want to make more of it. And actually, this is a really nice set of steps about how we can make more of it, targeted at a nice specific role, the CMO. And then that's not a nice sort of wrap up you give there on the content of the webinar, and also like don't call it a webinar necessarily, something like an exec brief, and then how to follow up off the back of that. I sort of like that as a set of steps to move through the funnel.
Yeah, and I think the key here is the sequence of ideas, right? So the webinar's got to, or the white paper rather, has got to be really, really specific. So it can't be the CMO's guide to data analytics. Well, nobody wants that. Right?
Yeah.
It's got to be the CMO's guide to improving customer retention or improving brand engagement and loyalty or whatever it may be, right? And you're using data as a tool to achieve that business outcome, and you're walking them through how to do that. And then the webinar then just takes it to the next level. And I think you have to kind of differentiate the webinar from the white paper. It can't be the same. And it's got to kind of help them take the next step. Not everyone will be ready for the next step or be interested, but for those who are, it's got to take them to the next step. And you got to keep in mind the webinar's goal is to get the phone call. That's all, right? You're not trying to sell anything. You're not trying to even necessarily educate. You're trying to get the phone call. So you want to get them to the point where they see the opportunity and they understand that they can't do this on their own and they've got to call you. Right.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing I want to mention is I sound like a broken record because I've been advising people to do this a lot, but I think it just makes good sense. So I'm not going to stop. is to start a podcast.
Yeah.
The podcast I think is helpful in a few really important ways. First of all, it's a faster path to a conversation with a buyer. Right.
Okay.
So in your case, you could do something broader around data. And initially I was thinking maybe you talk to CDOs, but given our conversation now, I think you should be talking to marketing leaders. You should be talking to CMOs, right? So you do a podcast on data for CMOs. Okay. And you go and, I think a good way to seed this podcast is you talk to some of the people in your network right now, like your referral partners. Yeah. And you get some episodes in the bank that way. You go and talk to some of your current clients to talk about the work that you're doing. And maybe you get to 10 some odd episodes that way. But then you go out and you use the podcast Not so much as an audience building tool, although I think that there's a benefit in that, but I'm thinking of it primarily as a prospecting tool. So you make your list of 100 organizations that you want to be selling to. Like these are your ideal, and maybe 100's too much. Maybe for now you go, 30 to 50 ideal clients, right? And you go reach out to the CMOs and you say, look, I'm doing this. We've got this podcast on how CMOs can extract customer insights from data. Given your role in the industry and your experience, we'd love to hear your thoughts and see what you're up to and what you're doing, what some of the challenges are. And I think that's, all things considered, that's going to get you a better conversion rate on the conversation than, hey, we do data, can we help you? Right?
Yeah.
And it's, everyone loves to talk about themselves. That's a fact, right? I've seen that firsthand with this podcast, and it's good. It gives them an opportunity to toot their own horn, make themselves look good, and share a piece of content on social media that elevates their personal brand. But then on your end, it makes them kind of open up to you and share what they're doing, share what they're working on, share the opportunities and the challenges. And you get insights that you otherwise it would be very difficult to get those kinds of insights in a sales conversation.
Yeah.
Right. Because of the resistance that comes with it.
Yeah. Really like, what's your thoughts on mixing in with that, some thought leadership? So that is sort of a podcast talking to a CMO that gets recorded and you can share it and it's useful for lots of people around, but mixing that in with, the 5 growth hacks or data growth hacks for a CMO, or, your own content that I might want to bring to the table, or would you just kind of keep it at the lens that you've just talked about there?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it comes down to time. I think you got to be careful about your time. From your end, I would focus your energies on building that kind of evergreen funnel, white paper or report to webinar, right? And ideally do that for each business problem. So you start with one, and maybe you say, well, we have 3 business problems that we solve or business outcomes that we achieve for CMOs. Build one for each. And I'd really focus on that initially. And that'll take a year probably, right?
Yeah.
And if you and then the podcast could become useful in that regard, right? Because a podcast could become kind of like an incubator of ideas. So as you're creating the content for these different funnels, you can share them first in the podcast, and that helps you document the ideas. It helps you express them in the podcast and even get some feedback from people before they get packaged up into a white paper or a webinar or whatever it may be. But I wouldn't want you to distract yourself and create new content for the podcast at the expense of the funnel, because the funnel here is more important for you. And you can get a lot of interest in the podcast just from interviews, which are much easier on you.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Really good.
And then, with the podcast, it's for me, this is a sales process. So you're having those conversations with ideal buyers, and you're only making the offer to take the conversation further if through the interview you discover that there is an opportunity, and then you kind of make that turn and make them that offer. And if they bite, they bite. Even the ones that don't now know you, they feel good about you, they see you, most importantly, as a thought leader, as a voice in the industry that should be heard, and that could generate some really interesting referrals as well.
Great. Makes a lot of sense.
That's what I got.
Well, if that's all you got, that's pretty good.
I mean, what do you think though? I mean, it all sounds good, but what are some of the challenges you think in executing this?
Usually the time. So, I'm very conscious of keeping, particularly mine and my leadership team's hand in the client work. We are the ones that have done this. We've got the experience. We are providing the strategy for our clients, as well as trying to build a business. And typically, billable work and client work and driving outcomes for our existing customers is sort of priority day to day. So time is usually the thing that sort of gets in the way of not starting, but doing it consistently, like getting, you can get things off the ground, but keeping them going. So I think bandwidth is the sort of the prime challenge for focusing on that.
So I would really encourage you to focus in on the funnel first. I think the podcast is a great idea, but I don't think it should be your first step. I think build that funnel, choose that one business outcome that you want to start with. And however you make that decision, whether it's maybe you have some existing content on the topic that you can easily repurpose, that makes sense. Or if it's a particular business outcome that you would like to focus on now, however you make that decision, pick one, develop the white paper and keep it simple. Right? It doesn't need to be a 50-page white paper because it probably won't get read anyways, right? Something simple that's easy to digest, easy to consume. I mean, in the marketing parlance, they call it a lead magnet, right? But in your case, I think a lead magnet can't be as simple as a 3 to 5 page report. It's got to have some teeth to it that really helps you articulate your expertise and your authority in the space. But that said, keep it simple. Don't go too long. Get something out there because you can always refine it and add more to it later, right? You can do a version 1 and do version 2 and 3 later on. And then as soon as you're done that, build the webinar. And again, keep that simple. So as much as you can leverage insights from the white paper, but present them in an actionable way on the webinar, the better. So ideally, you're not creating new content, you're repackaging and repurposing and presenting in a certain way on the webinar. And it's only for people that are really interested in taking the next step. If they're not interested, if they don't have that desire that you mentioned earlier, you don't want them on the webinar.
Yeah.
Right. And so build out that funnel as fast as possible. And then once you've done that for one business outcome, and I push you to try to get that done within 2-3 months. Then you have a decision to make. Either you do that again for another business problem, or you work on something like the podcast, and that's a decision to be made.
Yeah.
Well, then once you have the funnel, also one other thing I'll mention is once you have that funnel in place, then you can start doing some active outreach outside of the podcast idea to CMOs on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Right. You start sending connection requests to CMOs, building relationships with them, and now you've got a couple of really powerful pieces of content to help engage them.
Yep. Sounds great.
So that's a lot to chew on, Jason. Any other questions?
No, that's been given loads to think about and focused attention a little bit. So that's been really useful. Really, really useful.
Good. I hope I didn't overwhelm you.
No, I'm normally the one giving the advice, so receiving the advice is quite nice for a change.
Good stuff. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a lot of fun, and we're looking forward to seeing what you come up with.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks very much for your time, Ahmed.
Thank you.
Catch you soon.
Hey, it's Ahmed here again. Before I let you go, there are 2 things I want you to do. The first is, if you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe to the show on iTunes or Google Play by visiting forecast.fm and clicking on the relevant link. While you're at it, please do leave us a rating or a review because it helps more people discover the show. The second thing is I want you to grab my free course on the 5 Ps of lead generation for professional services firms. Inside the course, you will get a step-by-step framework to help you generate a flood of new business for your firm. The course is 100% free of charge, and you can get immediate access at 5leadgen.com, and you can spell out 5 or use the number. Either one works. That's 5leadgen.com. Thanks for listening.